So just to recap, I know we talked about this last time, but so the one you sent me was Mithras, Behind the Shadows Lie Madness from 2007, I believe. And yeah.
And I got Necroccultus, Encircling the Mysterious Necro Revelation, which is from 2004/2005. It looks like.
Well, just what was your thought process behind picking the Mithras record?
So that one was kind of interesting because I wasn't sure if it necessarily fit into this subgenre of brutal technical death metal. I think it definitely had some technicality. It was definitely death metal, but was it brutal enough? And the more I kind of went back and listened to it, I thought, yeah, I think it could pass off for the brutal part. You know, you think of Suffocation, the unique leader bands, and I wasn't quite sure if it would fit into this conversation. But I thought, I think it's brutal enough to fly by. And that one was put out in what did you say, 2007? And they had come on my radar with their last album, which was called On Strange Loops. That came out in 2016, I believe. So there's a long period of time in between those two, and I was just kind of floored by how much I enjoyed On Strange Loops. So, I started going back and heard Behind the Shadows Lie Madness, and that was a really cool kind of progression of their sound from their previous, which was called Worlds Beyond the Veil. And they kind of started on that album to kind of drift into this kind of celestial otherworldliness kind of sound and subject matter. So I don't know, it really kind of captured my attention with kind of the music they're creating. Though I really want to get your thoughts on those. And I think you had said that you knew of Mithras and maybe even heard this one.
Yeah. First off, I know that you're a fan of the. I should also say, does my mic sound okay? This is my first time using a microphone, so I should be coming clear. Okay.
Yeah. How about mine? Because I'm just on my computer mic.
You are, Brian, I have to say, the best sport in terms of all my experimentation this past year with anything streaming. Like from the first stream I've done to here, I'm trying out new tech on you. I'll throw you completely under the bus. Hopefully it works out. If not, hope you have enough patience to help me out. But I'm glad it's working out.
Hey, I'm all for working out the kinks
okay.
for other people, because I'm just like a plug in and go guy. So I appreciate those of you who put forth that extra bit of effort, whether it be lighting or microphones or editing or all that fancy stuff.
This could have been a complete disaster, and you were like, "God damn, Kellen! I had spent all day dealing with my kids and in-laws and taking everyone to their camps and band practice. I want to sit down and have a conversation. I don't need to scream at you for your shitty microphone." So Mithras. What I would say is, yeah, I knew of them, and I was curious because to get your thoughts, knowing how much you enjoy sci-fi, along with your death metal.
Absolutely true.
This is a band that I would consider not only one of the most important death metal bands of the decade, but offered, there are a handful of death metal bands that I think you can like group in with this statement. Is they gave death metal like some forward thinking ideas. There were like, if you listen to a band like Severed Savior, for example, like in our last episode, I think that is a kind of technical death metal that feels in line with what a lot of other bands were trying to sort of replicate. Mithras, in my opinion, is doing something beyond that.
Absolutely.
To your point, it's an incredibly, it is just a technical band. The brutality, I wouldn't group it in. They seem to me like the pacing of it, right, is where is the most aggressive. They have taken the intensity of the speed that Morbid Angel had and just carried that piece. But to your point about the themes on their records, specifically starting, I mean, the Worlds Beyond the Veil, the artwork on that, right? It's like that like nebula, right? Like spatial nebula sort of clouds. That is pretty wild. And you did not really know what to do with that other than like, okay, this is might be some heady death metal.
Yes. It's almost like, that was 2003. It's almost like kind of that, like bad Photoshop kind of look. So I think it has that effect, but it's still, it's not bad enough that you would just kind of pass by. You know what I mean? It still looks pretty interesting.
Sure, it's not going to grab you like
right.
a incredible, like a.
I got it right here. I'll just pull it. Although, like something like this. Although I think on my screen it doesn't look as bad as, in person, I think.
But it doesn't give you a description. Like the band that when I was thinking about why they're so important is, if you consider a band like Origin, for example, I think they're doing something that was kind of sci-fi in theme and content.
Yep.
But they weren't as sort of forward thinking. Like the same fan who's going to pick up a Severed Savior release is also, I think, going to be interested in an Origin album, right?
Absolutely. I think, yeah.
For better or worse, whether people love that or hate that, I think they're sort of grouped into a similar sound in my mind.
Yeah.
Where Mithras, which I was really excited when you picked this one, I think they were trying to carve out something conceptually larger in scope. So this record's got,
for sure,
not just bonkers kind of guitar technique. Like, it is a guitarist's band.
I would say so. Yeah.
But you also factor in sort of the synth part of it as well.
Or even the effects or the delay that they're using. That, to me, really, really stands out. If you go back and listen to the first Contrarian album, and Leon Macy, the guitar player, does lead work on that album, and it's totally recognizable. Like, if you listen to that, you're like, oh, that sounds exactly like, the guy from Mithras.
Right.
It's just, it's a very distinct guitar tone that he uses
For
through
sure.
through his technique and delay or effects. I'm not a guitar guy, but it's just very very unique.
Yeah, someone who you come on and listen to and immediately like that. No one else sounds
Mhm.
quite like that.
Yes.
Um, I very much would say it's his band at this point. Would you say that's true?
Yes. In fact, even in the liner notes of this one on Strange Loops, I think he thanks his his bass player Rainer Koss, and because that was going to be his last album with the band. So um, I think for a while it was just those two guys. Leon was guitar, drum, synth. Rainer was um, vocals, bass, and bass synth. So I think right now, I don't know what the status of the band is. This came out in, what did I say, 2016?
Yeah, 2016.
Something like that. Um, and so I'm not sure if they're gonna if Leon's gonna continue with Mithras or start another project. But I think Rainer was kind of taking a break from music at that point.
Yeah. So did you, when you went back and you listened to this record after hearing on Strange Loops, like were there certain connections that you heard or that stood out to you? That did it seem like the same band? Did you hear any progressions? Like comparing the two records, what do you think?
Um, yeah, I actually think I went back to Worlds Beyond the Veil first, and then this one. But I did see kind of a starting point. They were still kind of just dabbling in this kind of world building way of writing music, writing this kind of celestial, um, otherworldly type conceptual music, and I did notice a lot, like you mentioned, the synth work was big. That's something that if you go back and talk about, bands like you mentioned, Origin, who's totally, has that sci-fi element, but also just has that kind of sterile production, unique leader type production where it's pretty much just all blasting all the way through. It's very clean and precise. Whereas this one whereas Mithras, I think, has a little more atmosphere they bring into their music. Some of the melodic, the very, kind of even the instrumental stuff on Behind the Shadows Lie Madness, like I think it's Under the Three Spheres. Like that song is just amazing. I could listen to it over and over. It's just really, really incredible. They're just great songwriters, I think.
So I think we mentioned this last time, but you've kind of factor in their influences and you think, so clearly I think Morbid Angel is the first band that comes to mind when I listen to them.
No doubt.
In terms of like grounding the major part of their sound, but
oh yeah,
then you think, okay, sci-fi and theme. In 2016 we get another really important band with a sci-fi oriented death metal record that ends up serving as, to some degree, like a sea change for what death metal would continue to sort of circulate around, right?
Right.
With Blood Incantation and Starspawn. And it's really interesting to see the contrast in terms of what separates the two bands and what really sort of like in my mind divided generations. Because clearly Blood Incantation was trying to ride a wave, right? And they found a certain sound within, bands who were trying to recreate 90s death metal.
Yep.
And it has worked to their benefit. And here's
absolutely.
And here's a band like Mithras, who just is on the tail end, really almost like a last. It's a tremendous album if you think about it within the context of the lifespan of the band.
Yep.
But it almost serves as like a ending point for a band, right? Like there are a few, when I talked about essential bands from the 2000s that have carried on. Another one that I would have to mention would be Ulcerate.
Right.
Because they started doing, they've evolved an incremental amount during the, I guess, about 2 decades now that they've been around. But
another Willowtip band, right?
Yeah. I think, they've gone through different labels over the course of the lifespan of their band. Like I know they've been on Relapse, for example.
One I remember, first one I heard was, I think, Everything is Fire. So that's the first one I heard, and that one was Willowtip.
Yeah. I think that's probably in my mind, at least, that's the one that's their best record. But that's also, that dates me, right? I think
what year was it? It was 2009.
I think because their early records are very like technical death metal for sure, but they start to sort of weave this different kind of riff structure later on in their career, and I think Everything is Fire is sort of the best place to start for that sound. But my point is, like, they're still putting out records that are sort of forward-thinking death metal. It's almost evolved into this kind of like dark metal, where their riffs could have come in these swells, right? It's not defined by the precision as much.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I think you maybe even say that for Mithras as well, where they have these kind of chaotic moments where they're just, the blast beats are going, the drums, and the vocals, and everything is kind of converging, but you still can pick out that kind of almost catchy guitar riff that they're throwing down. And it makes it really interesting to kind of try and separate everything and then listen to it as one idea, and then they'll just stop on a dime, and go into something really melodic. And the vocals I always thought were different than really any other kind of typical death metal band, where it's more of, there's a bit of grit to it. There's a bit of almost like it's like shouted the way but it's shouted in a way that you can almost understand every word. Pretty much, if you're following along, it's probably pretty easy to follow along with the lyrics. Just the way he enunciates with his kind of gravelly, shouted voice.
Yeah, and you factor in sort of the more sung aspects of it.
Yes.
It absolutely makes for a different kind of, very distinct sound, right? That goes along
Right.
with the guitar playing.
Yeah, that voice stands out to me. It's one of my favorite parts of that album, behind the Shadows Lie Madness. Great Seagrave artwork. I don't know if we mentioned that, but
Yeah. Um, it in that sense, I think this band and this record, but more important, like the catalog, right? There's not, I think there's 4 full lengths altogether.
yes, this but there's actually 9 years between Behind the Shadows and On Strange Loops, so quite a long stretch between these last 2 albums.
Right.
I'm not totally sure when the kind of the new wave of old school death metal started, but there's this shift where everyone wanted to kind of go back to the 90s and play more like that incantation, you know, old school Cannibal Corpse type of sound. And that's kind of what we have today, a plethora of, along with bands like who are taking this more sci-fi element and running with it, like Blood Incantation, or Nucleus from Chicago is another one I really like. So we're still in the midst of this kind of open-ended love letter to the 90s, you know. And
Yeah,
Mythos, I mean, they did the same thing. It was just back in 2000, 2002, whenever they started. There's no doubt that Morbid Angel is just a huge part of their sound. That's what I think most people would kind of tag them as. It's, as they progressed, they definitely kind of took on a more sound of their own, for sure.
yeah. I if I had to guess, I think it's somewhere around 2008, 2009 for me. If I had to put a specific date on it, there are singular examples. Like I think the first Obliteration record was in 2006.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think that's when the tides around 2008-9 started to turn for me. And by the time we get to 2016, there's tons of momentum behind it. But um, anything else you wanted to mention here with the Mithras release? Favorite tracks, or in addition to the ones you mentioned?
Yeah, I do kind of love the idea behind, it's kind of a concept album, and which kind of started on their previous album, Behind the Shadow. Worlds Beyond the Veil. This idea of like all these radio and messages we're sending out to space, right? And kind of this idea, like, what happens when something responds, and maybe it's not a a a good entity, it's something that's kind of sinister, maybe.
Sure.
Or and that's what kind of arrives in the idea of just kind of the they don't use kind of the typical death metal subject matter, even within the confines of science fiction, where it's not exactly Lovecraftian. It's not exactly like, xenomorph type alien invader. It's more like time space continuum type stuff.
Right.
And just, the possibilities of that type of interdimensional travel and communication.
Right. I think Mithras is part of, I think, Greek Roman folklore, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's what I read up on it.
Like this god that sort of moves beyond or in between like magic of the other world and the human world sort of deal. So there's this
Yes.
kind of like, right. I mean, you look at it's an interesting way to think about folklore and its intersection with like metaphysics, right?
Right.
Which I think they're tapping into, which to some degree seems heady, but they're like doing it with a sci-fi horror kind of angle.
Right. Exactly.
And if I don't know what it would be like to, be inside of that loop on that album cover, right? But like their guitar work, there's something so deliberate and calculated about it, right? You can tell to my, our point earlier about Leon being kind of like this central figure to the band's sound. There's like thematically, I think he does a great job sort of articulating the identity of the band with his singular the guitar, right?
Yeah.
Like the album artwork, the lyrical content, everything is wrapped up in his guitar work, in my opinion, when I listen to this record. Just that kind of like disorientation, I'm kind of being wrapped into a dream world,
Exactly. And that's what I mean about those effects that he uses.
Right.
That's what kind of brings you to that kind of side of it, that trance-like, or even some of the production work. Like it sounds like they're going from left to right, or on the stereo even,
right,
where it's kind of shifting.
right.
These kind of delays or different types of effects that they're using on that guitar, or even just the way he's constructing the riff, where it does seem almost like alien, in certain ways.
Here we go. Hey, I made it happen. I'm learning things. Here we go. Awesome. So there's our Mithras with the Seagrave cover. Classic death metal stamp of approval. So anyway, we'll move on from Brian's contribution to my listening habits over the past year, and I'll throw Brian up here for the Necroccultist.
My lighting is not as good. Kind of a darker cover.
It's pretty opaque, you're right. It's kind of It's you can see it. So even if you had the best lighting, possible, I think it'd be pretty crummy anyway. So, what'd you think of this one?
So I'd never heard of this band. When I looked them up, I noticed they were from Mexico. So I was kind of expecting almost like something like Shub-Niggurath or Cenotaph or Mortuary or something like that, like an evil, raw kind of death metal. And really what I found when I actually listened to it was more of just kind of a straightforward 90s kind of US sound. It's not overly technical or even fast. It's a lot of it's kind of mid-paced. What did stand out, similar to what Mithras does, is the soloing. The lead guitar has this really, really cool effects sound that they use. that I thought that stood out to me right away. I really enjoyed that part. In fact, I think the first song has a solo. It's really good.
Yeah, I was gonna say is that so. Just so you know, like I went through. I don't know when it was a while back. Um, a time period where I was trying to research. To your point about like Shub-Niggurath, part of Mexico, but I would also say Texas, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Like, yeah, absolutely.
There's something about that region that loves a little bit of Satanism with their death metal, right?
Yeah.
Like their black metal and death metal often is sort of intertwined in a way.
Yeah.
And I think we just got a brand new release by Imprecation. Is another band that I'll sort of group in with that sound, right? Which is like very deliberate in their blasphemy approach, right?
Yes.
And I was looking for more bands in that sound, in that style. But one of the caveats that I had when I was doing my research during this time period was like, it has to be a straight up death metal band. It can't be a black death band.
Okay. Yep, that makes sense.
And Necroccultist fit that description for me. They were unmistakably, it wasn't like a black death or war metal band.
Mm-mm.
There was enough sort of mid-pace groove going on this record that it was clearly a death metal band for me, and you would unmistakably, right?
Yeah.
If you now there's a go ahead.
No, yeah, absolutely. It's very. I mean, no, there's no really black metal tendencies at all going on here. I mean, other than like the back photo, there's some leather, I guess, but and maybe even the on the back here, this kind of font,
right,
is more kind of in that black metal realm. So if you look at this and you look at the titles, you would think maybe this could very well be some a black thrash or a black death metal band.
Yeah, and if you there's a compilation that was released. It's up on Metal Archives, but I think it was just got a cassette release. But if you look at the bands that they're compared, on that compilation, a lot of them are in the
I see,
sort of Black Death style.
Yep.
In that regard, I think they kind of stand out. Is yes, like the lyrical content and kind of the image, the whole look and vibe. In terms of if you were to pick that up off the shelf, you could definitely see this could be potentially one of those that style. But they just kind of have like a mid pace. To your point, very much like an American kind of groove to them at times. That is not. It's just not like a whatever some like an Angel Corpse sort of and super intense blast beat, that kind of sound at all.
No, it's in fact the one band that kind of I was trying to correlate to this was like early Malevolent Creation. That's kind of what I was hearing, with the bit of the thrashiness of their riffs. That's kind of where I was going. So more of that kind of East Coast type 90s death metal, even some Cannibal Corpse, early, you know, that's kind of the marker that I kept going back to. It's like the sounds like not the vocals, definitely not the vocals, but the some of the melodies they were going with, not even the melodies, but the riffs they were creating.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's like a simplicity to them.
Yeah, there you go.
But so the reason we talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but a lot of the bands from this era, I would say even with the few conversations we'd had, often get lumped into with this identity during the 2000s that most of the death metal is coming out is part of this kind of intersection of, brutality and technicality.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I really wanted to bring out this Necroccultist is it is not that at all. It is very much just kind of like mid-paced traditional, almost coming out of more simplistic elements of 90s death metal. But beyond that, I think if you also think about the kind of Black Death bands, or the way in which, let's say, a band like Deicide, for example, comes around and introduces this level of Satanism.
Yeah.
Even though like they had the artwork and the imagery, then at the same time, Incantation was also doing like a little bit of this satanic vibe as well, but they don't have quite the same level of explicit satanic. By the time
they weren't as direct. Incantation, they weren't as direct. I mean, Deicide's like,
right,
you know what we're all about.
Yes, but then you get into, I think, later in the 90s, here comes, and I think I mentioned Angel Corpse earlier.
Yeah.
Coming from Order from Chaos, which is very much like that's part of their sound.
Just a pummeling onslaught of just blackened death metal.
Right. There's enough, yeah, like there's a blackened element to them, right?
Yeah.
And then another one that I think to be mentioned is Vital Remains.
Sure. Yeah.
They're like, those albums are continuing to sort of up the ante in terms of the speed, the aggression, how deliberately blasphemous. If the other scene that we kind of have talked about is the Polish scene, right? Like the Polish has this other, you want to talk about, like, this is the rise also, what, love it or hate it, of like the behemoth, Azrith is another one that I really like from that time period. They share, in my opinion, a certain degree with the Brazilian scene. That is also has that like a drier production style, relentless in terms of its drumming and pacing,
very kind of dirty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you factor all those things in, I think Necroccultist, for a band that is living in that sort of blasphemous death metal, evil death metal environment, I think they also sound a little bit different than a lot of their peers, just because it is sort of this like even keel, like you took the pacing of Cenotaph, but you took the sort of aesthetic of, a more of like a blasphemous sort of Shub-Niggurath or something like that. So
there's definitely like a certain darkness to this that maybe you would hear like maybe on an Incantation record. Just that aura. I mean, I think both this has plenty of that kind of mid-90s atmosphere to it. Everything they're doing with their sound kind of leads back to that. And it's very It was one I never even heard of this band. But you said you had to kind of go digging for it, right? You went searching for this
Yeah.
type of style. So it would open up for you, especially if you're just looking at Mexico specifically.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love this. So obviously the era that we're in, obviously,
Yeah.
but also, I don't think bands, Mexico, parts of South America, there's a lot of focus on those death metal or extreme metal bands.
Yeah.
When I did the Brazilian episode, part of my sort of the thrust or impetus for that was to try and introduce like a conversation surrounding death metal that was not American or European,
Mm-hmm.
which for good reason. I mean, they're well recognized and respected, but
yes,
I just
needs it. Sometimes it just needs a spotlight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Necroccultist. I mean, this is, I think, their lone full length. So it's not like they're a prolific band with there's a lot of splits and so on and so forth. Yeah, I thought it would be an interesting sort of comparison and contrast to a lot of the bands that we've talked about from this decade, and
yeah, definitely. Like I think every band we've talked about has kind of had their own, has been kind of within this brutal technical death metal conversation, but also each has their own kind of identities, whether it be that throwback 90s sound or the sterile technical music, or the otherworldliness, or the melodicism. There's a lot going on during this time period. And I think, this is just like, even your episodes are just, or your videos on this were just kind of scratching the surface. At least for me, because a lot of those albums I've been checking out here and there. Beyond Mortal Dreams, I'm looking at the logo up there. I'm like, that's a big one that I acquired in the last month or two and really been enjoying. And then I'm kind of looking under here too, and I see the Deadeye.
Eucipian?
Yeah, Eucipian. That one's amazing.
Yeah, for sure.
Prostitute Disfigurement. Yeah, there's just so much. There's so much good underground, unknown, unappreciated 2000s death metal for sure.
We'll close this out here. Thanks, Brian, for going through this Cut Your Teeth series with me. I appreciate it. The patience. I think we planned it appropriately, knowing at the pace that we would have time for.
Yes, I think I remember you said we could do one every few months, and I think we kept to that schedule, which is good. I think it allowed. I mean, you're a busy guy. You got a weekly. You will during about halfway through, you started doing the weekly heavy metallurgy album clubs, and that's every week you got to dive into an album. So that's a lot to take in, I think, especially albums you never heard before. So but definitely thank you for inviting me for this ride. It's been fun digging into these for sure.
And thank you once again for being my test subject for all of my crazy attempts at learning how to function on a streaming platform. So
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I wanted to reach out because when I first did the Cut Your Teeth series, gosh, I mean that's like over a year ago now.
I was gonna say I remember it was maybe in last summer.
Yeah,
maybe when the first one came out.
Yeah, hold on. You want to have your moment of fame? Okay, there you go. I need to get her off of my lap. Yeah. Anyway, the reason what I was getting at is there was such like a positive response and from a little good amount of people, but you definitely stood out in terms of people who were like, hey, I remember this time period.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, when I get this, I have an opportunity to, I think Brian be the first person I want to talk to, just because you'll not only would it be like, it wouldn't be a major pain in the ass to ask someone to listen to these records, you know, where it's like, I know sometimes when you get a chance to do a stream, you know, for someone who does like the album club right now, it's every once in a while you're like cursing someone's name for making you listen to something that they hate. So the last thing I wanted to do was like hand you a handful of records, you know, that you would despise me for making you listen to them and be like, this asshole. I put time aside to talk to him and could jump on his stream, and I talk about records I hate. So I didn't want to do that to you. Yeah. Anyway, back to where we were going for is I just wanted to thank you for doing this. And, I'll send all your CDs back to you.
Yes.
And there'll be some surprise gifts in there as well, for all that you did. So
yes, you as well. I think you actually know a few, but
yeah, I during this year I was like, okay, there's a few things I want to include that I think would be beneficial and kind of, you know, make it worth to some degree, like honor just your time and your effort. So
cool, thank you.
Is there anything before I get out of here like what's going on the Brian Arkham channel?
Yeah, you'll probably see me on a live stream here or there, or you know, maybe a collaborative video, but I don't know if I'm going to be doing many. Just turn on the camera and shoot kind of collection update stuff.
I can I anticipate the 420 series with the Dreadful Minutes will continue.
I think that's a definite.
Someone needs to fly that flag, God damn it! Like,
right.
If there's anyone to do it, it's you and Rick. So
yes. You got that right. We got to talk about all of the bong rippers and the bong wraiths and the bog witches and the swamp witches and the electric wizards and the telekinetic yetis and the twin wizards and all of the stoner doom out there.
Good. How about here's maybe a better question for the Cut Your Teeth series.
Yeah.
What were the other albums that you were potentially considering sending me? Do you remember?
Okay.
Or is there one off the top of your head that you were like, here's one that I almost sent?
Yeah. There was one I really wanted. The one I really wanted to send, I did not actually have a physical copy of.
Okay.
And that was the band Beheaded from Malta.
Okay.
Ominous Bloodline. I think that's a fantastic album. But it was kind of more in line with the Severed Savior, so I think sending both, you know, would have been a little redundant.
Okay.
But I do really enjoy that one. And that's kind of in the middle of their discography. Coronzonic Force Domination. That was the one.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the one I think I pulled. I think I was going to send that, and I pulled that one for Yattering when I thought of Yattering. So, yeah, Internal Suffering from Colombia. Are you familiar with them? They put out.
No, who am I thinking of?
I kind of have
Immersed in Blood. That's what I was thinking.
Oh, I don't know that one.
That is what I was thinking. Yes. Yeah, Immersed in Blood, Killing Season from 2003. It's brutal death metal from Sweden.
Okay. I think I remember another one, Behemoths from Phoenix. God Was Created from 2002. That was another one I was kind of kicking around.
Okay. Well, the reason I thought is like a good way to end this would be potentially to name a few other, not only albums that, you know, you're digging now, but people who do watch this who aren't interested in this era, maybe something for them to check out as we kind of round things out. So I'm gonna let you go here with this stream, and once again I'll do all the regular stuff, and I've got photos for you and everything, so I'll be able to jump out on this. But thanks again, Brian.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for having me. Cheers.